Good morning, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So first I want to greet you. I know that we have visitors from some local, but also some people from across the country. So as the Chief Ed Officer for Chicago Public Schools, I'd like to say welcome to Chicago, and I hope that you have an opportunity to interact with some of my colleagues that are here in the room today and just learn so much more about the great work that we're doing here in Chicago. But I have to tell you that we almost didn't make it into this cohort, and that's a big deal to me. And I definitely want the CPS principals in the room to kind of hear this story as well as a few other stories that really, I guess, describe why or illustrate why this is such an important program for me. But I learned about the grant that came through ISB just by talking to somebody by chance. And it sounded a lot like a program that I engaged in as a principal when I was at my first school, Raby High School, that sought to identify underrepresented students and put them into AP classes. But I make that comment because I feel like my entire career, my entire life is always about being in the right place at the right time. This program is critically important for a number of different reasons. First of all, it bridges what I call the opportunity gap. There's a lot of talk about the achievement gap. It's been documented. It's a national problem. It has persisted over time. But the opportunity gap, I think, is even more dramatic, and one of the things that keeps students who come from a certain demographic background, socioeconomic, race, etc., that keeps them blocked from the American dream. And I want to tell you a story that kind of illustrates that. As the presenter said, I attended Hyde Park High School, which at the time was one of the top schools in Chicago. And we had two programs at the time. We had kind of a selective program, a magnet program. It was one of the first IB programs leading into that at the time. And we had a neighborhood program. And a lot of schools in Chicago are kind of organized that way to provide access for people who live in the community. Went to high school, had a wonderful experience. All of my classmates in that Magnet and Gifted program went on to do great things. People keep in touch. The reunions are a blast. I hear great things. But I remember being a young teacher, and I have a best friend, and she was working in finance, traveled to London to do like a 2-year internship, met people there, and I would go visit because it was free room and board, and all I had to do was scrape up a plane ticket and get to travel across the world. And once we were sitting at a table where she had met another African-American lady who just happened to be from Chicago, attended a Catholic school, and we started talking about the difference between CPS and Catholic schools, and you know how those debates go, especially, I'm sure it's the same across the country, but they get really heated here in Chicago. If you have ever visited Chicago, or if you migrated to Chicago, the first question people ask you is, what high school did you go to? Because that means a lot, it says a lot, it tells you a lot about people. So we just started talking about the differences, and at this time I'm a young teacher, still planning on changing the world. I was going to get there. And then this other woman that was with us, who was also visiting, she started talking about her high school experience, and she was saying teachers did this, the kids did that. It was just one of the most horrific stories I had ever heard. And I finally said, well, what school did you go to? And she said Hyde Park. And at this point, I'm a young teacher. I've been through college. I was ready to, fight the power, fight the man. And it was at that point where I first realized the shame of my privilege. Now, I grew up on the South Side. My parents were working class, working poor. But we had a lot of advantages that I myself did not realize until that very moment. Coming from a 2-parent household changes things. My father would be up at the school in 2 minutes if one of the 5 Jackson kids didn't do something that they were supposed to do, and people knew that. And we were afforded every single opportunity that the schools had to offer. If a special person was coming to visit, they would wheel us out. If there was a special field trip, they would take us there. If there was a special program, the same people were picked all the time. And I realized that the same system that I was working in, that I criticized like so many, I had benefited from. And it was at that point that I decided that whether it was in the role of teacher, in the role of principal, and at a very young age, I knew that I would be in this role because it's just the kind of person that I am. I knew that I wanted to change that opportunity gap. And what this cohort provides is an opportunity to do that in a systematic way with additional supports. Because there are far too many students who are blocked from those opportunities because of their background, because of their social capital status, because they don't know how to speak up, and because they're afraid. So when I became a principal, I did a lot of the things when I read about this program, a lot of the things that you guys are doing or going to do if you're new to this program, those were policies and procedures that we put in place. So I was a principal for 11 years. The first school was a selective enrollment school. The first school was a neighborhood school. The second school was a selective enrollment school. And if you know anything about selective enrollment schools in Chicago, they, beyond the stratification throughout the district, there's a hierarchy there. So when I first told the teachers that we were not going to pick students for advanced placement classes based purely on test scores, people went crazy. And, that was easy because they just had to do what I said. And leaders, you have to make strong. And I made a case. I talked about the opportunity gap. I told stories of students who, at my former school, through this other program we had that we put in AP classes that didn't even know they were college bound, that are now in college. But the place where I really struggled, and I hadn't anticipated this, was with some of our parents. Because there were students who we programmed because we believed in them, and we believed that they would do better in an AP course or taking on a more rigorous course load. And the parents would come to me and say, take my child out. Johnny's up all night. Kiana can't, take care of her other responsibilities because she's spending too much time, she's stressed out. And it required a lot of work to really convince parents that this was what was best for their student. And it took time, it wasn't easy, and I'm not gonna pretend like it is, and I'm sure people in this room can share individual stories of what it takes. But one thing that I do wanna leave you with is that it does require leadership, and it does require courage. It does require a mind shift amongst the adults, the parents who sometimes don't believe that the kids need to be pushed as hard as they need to be pushed, amongst the teachers who sometimes don't believe students can do it or they don't want to see them fail. You have to create a culture, not where failure is okay. I hate when people say that because it's not okay. We know in society people are not allowed to fail. But you have to have high expectations for people, and you have to provide them with high levels of support. And I believe that those two things are the secret ingredients for any successful school. So one of the things that I want to challenge people to do today, no matter what your role is, whether you're the principal, AP, teacher leader, district leader, whatever role you play in this program, I just want to leave you with my face, my story as a shining example of what happens when students are provided an opportunity, but also leave you with a visual of that young lady that I talked about sitting across the table, who was sitting right in the same building, had the same experience. Not the same experience, was in the same building, could have had the same experience that I had, and we ended up on totally different pathways because somebody made a choice that said I was college bound and college ready and said that she was not. So that's why this program is so important. So I'm so glad that we didn't miss this opportunity. I'm so glad that we have 6 phenomenal schools, and we picked these schools not only based on the opportunity to see more minority students in AP classes, but we picked them because of the phenomenal leadership represented at each one of these CPS high schools. And as a district, improving high schools is one of our primary areas of focus. Unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you've heard that Chicago Public Schools is on the rise and that we are an outlier when you look in particular at elementary school performance, high school graduation growth, college access. There's so many metrics pointing in the right direction, and it's phenomenal. But one of the goals that we've set, an ambitious goal that we've set, is to have 50% of our students walk away from high school with some kind of college credit underneath their belt. So participating in the Lead Higher program is going to help us get more and more students of color, more and more students from low-income backgrounds in positions to be successful. So on behalf of the district, again, I want to thank you and welcome you to our great city, welcome you to learn more about what CPS is doing, and we look forward to learning from you and all the best practices that are happening not only throughout the state, but throughout the country. Thank you.